to 5 guiding questions for our process. And that is, what are the best predictions we can make about the future our children will encounter over the next decade? To get us started, we're fortunate to have Mark Anderson here to help us begin this discussion. Mark is considered one of the great thinkers in the technology industry. He's the founder and CEO of Strategic News Service. SNS was the first subscription-based newsletter on the internet and is read by leaders like Bill Gates and Michael Dell and Mark Hurd, and industry leaders and investors in computing and communications worldwide. He's also the founding chair of the Future in Review, or known as the FIRE Conference, which The Economist has labeled the best technology conference in the world. He's also CEO of the SNS Project Inkwell, the first global consortium to address technology design changes for one-to-one computing in K-12 classrooms. Mark regularly appears on CNN TV, NPR, as we have on the sign on the highway that you saw, the Wall Street Review, and in the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and the New York Times. He writes the Future in Review technology column for Fortune magazine, and is a frequent speaker at conferences around the world. I am really pleased and honored that Mark is donating his time to come and speak to our community. I really appreciate that, Mark. Thanks. And I look forward to the thoughtful conversations that will occur as a result of what we hear from him and how that can leverage us into the future. So welcome, Mark Anderson.
Hi, everybody. Nice of you to be here this dark evening of winter. Fog, ice, rain, sleet. It's kind of great to be a Northwesterner, isn't it? I just came from Silicon Valley where it was 27 degrees. They couldn't drive, or they were scraping ice off the cars. They didn't know what to do. And global warming, by the way, is real, and people cause it. And if any of you watch Fox News, just stop it right now. It's not news. So this evening, what I'd like to do is talk to you for 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll do a Q&A or a conversation. And I'd like to begin by saying I'm not a futurist. I know you saw that. I'm not one. Futurists, in my book, talk about flying cars, and I don't talk about flying cars. I try to talk about things that will probably happen in the next 3 years or 5 years, which usually is the most difficult period of time to make accurate predictions. So that's where I live. That's where I make all my money. And I think that's probably the most important window for all of us, because it's just enough time to do something about it, and you can test yourself at the end of the project. And I want to talk to you tonight about something which is near and dear to my heart, and no doubt, I think, to yours, and that is the role of technology in schools. But having said that, that's not really what I want to talk about. It'll turn out, I hope if I do a good job with you, that you'll believe that technology is a past point, it's a path that'll bring you to a new way of educating your children. But let me say it first, and I'll say it 5 more times. This is not about technology. I'll say it again. This is not about technology. So often this conversation about what role technology might play in schools gets hung up on, I don't know, what's the box, or who bought the device? Is it Apple or? Forget all that. It's not about that. This is about taking a teaching system which we got from William Webster in the 18-whatevers, which we still use essentially unchanged today, and moving forward into the 20th century. And no, I did not say the 21st century. So, since the advent of the information age, whichever day you want to pick for that, we have been using a system which is essentially uninformed by everything we know in terms of how people learn, how to teach them, how to do research, how to write, how to cut and paste, make a list. And it's time for us to allow our children to do exactly what they already do on their smartphones in their classrooms. And the results of that have nothing to do with technology, but they have a lot to do with being able to bring students into the 21st century, or even the 20th century. So that's really the function of all this. And I'll spend a few cycles here talking about why I should even be up here, because I think if I were you, I'd ask that question. Back in 2004, our group recognized a problem. That was the problem. The problem was the people in education were all talking within their own world, and the people in technology were talking within their own world, and they were definitely not communicating. PC makers and makers of anything you want to talk about in technology were not talking, with a few exceptions, to educators, to children, to people in schools, and so forth. So there was a huge bottleneck, and we tried to break that. And for the first time ever, as far as I know, we got a group of the vendors together and brought in students and administrators and teachers and so forth, and for about 7 years ran meetings on a regular basis to try to understand what should happen next. So that's probably the reason I'm up here this evening talking to you, is that I spent that time learning myself what I'll try to share with you tonight about best lessons in what not to do and what to do if you want to have a kind of a transparent, relatively seamless, easy experience that leads to good things. Because as I'm sure you all already know, as with everything, there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. And if you do it the wrong way, it can be a complete muck-up. And then you really are focused on the technology and what's wrong with it and why didn't it do what was promised and why are we spending all this money on a bad thing. It is possible to muck this up. So part of the reason to have had that was called Project Inkwell was to avoid all the potholes of mucking it up and provide some lessons ahead of time for people, I hope just like you, who are interested in bringing your kids forward into skill sets that are 21st century skill sets. So that's really what I want to share with you tonight. And I'll find maybe a few different ways of doing it. But the most important part will be talking to you at the end, because once you get engaged and are able to ask questions that you care about, I think that's where the real value is for what I can bring to you. So I'll try to kind of push through this pretty quickly and then get to you folks, because how you see this matters most. It is obvious that the world is changing, and I think that Michael did a great thing by having, John, there was a person from the PI who wrote trends out. I took a look at those trends. They seemed to make a lot of sense to me, and perhaps an incomplete but very good description of the kind of world that kids are going to be facing. And you all already know that because you're already facing it. So the days of lifelong employment are over. Kids are facing like an ever-changing series of either make your own job up or make your own company or work for 10 companies. You're never going to have, probably, never going to have lifelong employment. You're probably not going to have a pension. All the things that my dad lived for and had, they won't have any of those things. And the idea of lifelong learning, which sounded kind of like lip sync stuff maybe 20 years ago, that's critical. People, when you look at Bill Gates, or if you ask somebody today, how did you make Microsoft, how did you make some company? Those people trained themselves. They didn't go to school. Well, how did they train themselves? On a computer. That computer was linked to a bigger computer that had information that allowed them to go at their own speed and to do great things. Like as not, they dropped out of school, out of the normal Webster school system, to do this self-training to get really good at something they love doing and make money. And in fact, many of them got wildly rich. So it's not a sport case, really. Really, I think we're seeing signposts that say it's time for us all to wake up and say, why shouldn't all of our students be able to do that in school instead of having to drop out of school to follow their passion? Shouldn't they be able to follow their passion inside the school system at their own speed? And now I want to share with you something which I think is the real magic in all of this. And it has nothing to do with technology. It's the third time I said that. There are many unintended or unexpected consequences of what they call one-to-one computing, where every student has access to the world of knowledge. It's through a device of some kind, but we don't care what the device is right now. So it's called one-to-one. One student, one access point. Two unexpected things that happen. One is every student can go at her own speed. Imagine classes today. Pick a normal classroom. 29 kids, 27 kids, whatever the number is. In general, in America, I'm going to state my own opinion about this now. This is not Michael's opinion. It is more likely that that class will go at the slowest student's speed, for whatever reason that student is having a tough time, than at the fastest student's speed. That's our school system. That's how it works. It's required. It's required by the system that we've got. You can take the best teachers in the world, and I'm going to go with mine and say, you've got them already. You can take the best administrators, you can have the best building in the world, and that system, You could add another $50 billion to that system. It's been done in California, and no good comes of it. In fact, probably you'll see scores drop, as we've seen since 1965. We've increased the spending per student by 4x, 400%, and performance dropped. So forget about the money for a minute. It's a rat hole. The system we have today, in general, you could put 10x more money into it and get a 0.01x improvement, or it might go down. So it's not a money problem. It's a system problem. Maybe we don't want to have a system where the entire class in physics or math or whatever it is has to go as slow as the slowest student. That's crazy. No one would ever design that. You would never have that as a requirement for a system that you're building. In fact, you'd probably have a requirement saying something like, how about every student going at her own speed? Okay, that makes some sense. And then how about the system adapting to the student so that if this student learns kinetically, and this student learns from spoken word, and this student learns from the text-based word, and this student learns from color or simulation, okay, we learned that. And then that student, from then on, learns physics that way. Sounds obvious, doesn't it? You can't do that with this system. It's impossible to do that. It's prevented. So I think there are things that happen that make terrific human being common sense when you just think about how to teach and learn, but which this system that we have, of which we're all so proud, completely prevents. And the trick here, I'll say it again, is not about technology. It's about creating a system that would allow every student to go at his or her own speed. The other unintended result of this is, and I love this part of it, they all go faster. Isn't that cool? So you think, wait a minute, okay, everybody's going to go at their own speed, the slow one will go slow, the fast one will go fast. Nope. When everyone goes at their own speed, almost without exception, they all go faster. So think about that for a moment. What does that imply? And I want you to imagine now, imagine the classroom. So, and just so you have some mileposts here, a lot of the work we did came from various people who tried this in real classrooms. I'm not just making this up. And one of the places we looked is a place in San Diego. There's a fellow named Darrell Agace, who at that time, young Darrell, was one of the world experts and standout heroes in this whole world. Darrell Agace was in this little place called Lemon Grove, San Diego. For those of you who know San Diego, it's the poorest school district in San Diego. 47% of the kids are on federal lunch program. There's something like 27 languages spoken in the school district. It's not the place you want to be if you're thinking you're going to have an easy time. And Darrell was able to bring one-to-one computing into that situation and create a revolution in learning. Now, Darrell's a real go-getter, so he did a lot of things that you wouldn't have to do here. But this is also 15 years ago. Among the things that he was able to achieve was kind of redefining how the classroom works. Now, you'll read about this stuff today. You can read about it anywhere you go. But Darrell was one of the very first people to figure this out. So one thing he figured out was, it's not going to be me standing up here and all of you sitting there getting instructions from me. How's this going to work? Well, if you each had a device that was an appropriate device, kind of rugged, you drop it, it won't break, maybe you should be talking to each other. So the physicality of the classroom changed. And now they call it pods. He didn't have that word at the time. So you have kids sitting together in 2s, 3s, and 4s talking to each other. Guess what it turns out? I know you know this already. It's another human thing, one of those human being lessons. Kids turn to each other for help before they ask the teacher. We all always did that. But we had to kind of break the rules. We had to whisper to each other and get yelled at. But we didn't want to embarrass ourselves. It's much easier just to say, hey, Larry, do you get this? Well, that's what kids do. And instead of it being illegal, if you encouraged that kind of behavior by organizing pods in the physical classroom, guess what else happens? It takes a huge load off of the teacher. For things that other kids really understand already and can share with their friends, it makes the teacher free to do things that only the teacher can do. Sounds kind of obvious, but it's, again, this system that we have now won't allow that. Another aspect of the classroom which is not totally apparent from the get-go is, today, if I were running a classroom and I said, okay, we're going to talk about how the kidney works. Now, who understands this salt concentration thing? One hand would go up, you know, Shirley or Larry would, and would explain it to the rest of the class. Everybody else is sleeping. And that's not right. That's not what we want. We don't want to only have the smart kid answer every question. We want to have every kid in the classroom engaged in answering every question. Well, that's exactly what happens when every kid has her own access point and is doing the work. And it gets better than that. So now imagine that I'm a teacher, and every kid has a pad with a keyboard or a laptop, whatever you want to call it, I don't care what you call it. And I'm having a little quiz on quadratic equations. You remember quadratic equations, right? And so everyone's going through the quiz, and I can see all of the kids' laptops on my laptop. I can see their screens. And I can see that you're having trouble with number 3. It's that c² thing. You just cannot get that to make sense, right? Why c²? So while everybody else is bumbling around, I can walk right over to your desk and say, look, here's the reason. And you go, oh, thanks, I get it. And then off you go. And somebody else is having trouble with, why is it a square root of that whole thing? Well, I'll tell you why. So I walk over to your desk and I tell you. This is a radically different way of teaching, because before, the teacher didn't have the information, didn't know that you were stuck in c², you were stuck in the square root, somebody else was stuck on something else. That data didn't exist. There's no way for the very best teacher in the world to use our current system and do what I just described. It can't be done. So instead, you get kind of mass ignorance. You suffer, and you try to work it out at home. It doesn't work. You fail the test, you come back, fail the test. Finally, somehow, somebody tells you something. Well, that's inefficient. You could have found out from me in 3 minutes if I knew that that's where you were getting stuck. So in this classroom, which looks an awful lot like an old classroom except for this fact that we have these desks pushed together, the way in which people learn is radically different. And that's the magic. It's got nothing to do with technology. That's the 5th time I said that. I won't say it anymore. So think about this for a moment. Quickly, what happened in Lemon Grove was the textbooks, when I showed up for the first time, we went down and did a site visit. Heard about Darryl, heard about Lemon Grove, did a site visit. And we walked into a math class. And in the math class, all the books were piled on the floor with flower pots on top. And they all had these really cool little pads that Darryl had designed himself and managed to buy. Today, it would cost less just to go to Toys R Us or, some store. So Darryl did a lot of extra work to get his school. He was really 15 years ahead of himself. Thank God for the rest of us. And we walk in there, and we had a theory that was completely a theory. There was no proof whatsoever. But the idea was, probably in this kind of a teaching and learning situation, we're going to find out something very interesting about human beings and about students, which is, okay, let's say that the first two things I said were true, that every student goes at her own speed and that everyone goes faster. But probably out of every class of 27, there's going to be 1 or 2 of those kids that we didn't know about really who's a super learner. We called them super learners. Somebody who's just going to go, and they're probably there now, but the system is so messed up in terms of what we just talked about that they don't always show up on the radar. Or if they do show up on the radar, what would a teacher do other than spend her own money, stay late at school, and all that stuff, right, which we're doing today? So let's say that you didn't have to spend your own money, stay late at school. In fact, all you had to do is just say, oh, Philip, you like physics? Go. How fast can you go? You can do a lesson a night if you want. So we asked his teacher, said, by the way, have you noticed anything like something where kids, really go fast, really fast? She said, well, look at that. And she had mapped every student on the wall with where they were in their math. And there was one kid who had gone all the way through the year, all the way through the next year. And he was finishing 2 years of math in a year. And it's like, now what? She said, I'm running out. She had 1 more month left, I think, in the school year. It was like, now it's going to be what? The 3rd year? I don't know. So clearly, this kid was what we would have called a super learner. He had an aptitude, not necessarily for music or whatever, but in math, he had it. And he loved it, and he was He was just cranking it out. Isn't that what we should have for every kid? I mean, it doesn't matter who they are. They can love music, they can love physics, they can love Spanish. It just doesn't matter. But if they have the ability inside of our own system to do that, wow. I have a bias, which is I think most kids, I can't say all kids, that would be unfair, but I think most kids have that. It's just that we don't give them the keys to the car. Instead, we give them what they can't do. Imagine if you're a kid today. You probably have, and this I think is a good number, 5 computing devices in your life at all times. One's the computer at home, one's your own smartphone or phone, you've got another thing that you're playing with somewhere else, you probably got an Xbox or something, you've got another computer that somebody else has at home, probably 2 computers, and you got the TV set that's attached. You probably have 5 computers in the car, and so you've probably got 5 computers in your life on a daily basis all the time. And then you come to school, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and your teacher says, shut off all your devices. You know what they do mentally? They shut that down. They disengage. It's like, are you kidding me? I live in a world with 5 computers real time all the time, and you're telling me to shut down my devices? For what? So I can listen to one person yammer on for 8 hours? I'm not there. I'm just not there, right? For a modern child with a modern child's brain, which has been hit by 20 billion ad images and television, radio, all of mass media, everything you can imagine, and you're going to say, well, here's what we're going to do. I'll just talk to you for a while. It doesn't work. They literally shut down. When you do a one-to-one project in a school, the very first thing that shows up as a metric is engagement. Kids are much more engaged in a one-to-one environment. You're giving them what they already know how to use. You're giving them a tool that for them is not new. For the teacher, it often is new. For the students, it's never new. They know how to use this, and they're delighted that they're going to be allowed to have a powerful tool which they recognize and can maneuver. It's their own little spaceship, instead of just being told to shut up and pay attention. It's radical in how it changes their sense of engagement and ownership in being in school. And I think if you talk to most educators, they will say that engagement is the top line thing. Everything else is second. If you don't have engagement, forget it. If you do have engagement, anything else can happen. So this is a non-trivial success. I'll go through a few other parts of this that are also not obvious. And some of them are really not obvious. So here's an example. Teachers in schools where technology is brought into the school almost always are the top resistors to this happening. And I think it's because they perceive that the technology will get between them and their gifts and the kids. It's like you're putting a wall. They think there's some kind of wall that's going to... Now, partly this is because teachers themselves aren't as adept at the technology as the kids are. So there's also this threat thing about, like, they're entering a world where the kids know more than they know, and that's reverse psychology. They want to be in a position of authority, so it's tough. However, those same teachers, 6 months later, are the champions for tech in schools. There are some exceptions, but in general, what I'm telling you is completely true. The same teachers that were resisting on day one are the biggest champions 6 months later. So what happens is that their expectations were incorrect, and that there wasn't a wall between themselves and the student. Now, one of the things that happened when we went down to Lemon Grove, we went into a science class. This was great. So we walk into class, and the kids, there had been fires, right? There had been big fires, wildfires in San Diego. And the project, this is a project-based, kind of interesting, teaching curriculum, and the project was go outside, go to these sites where we had wildfires, get some soil, bring it back, and test it for erosion. And so each pod, 4 kids in a pod, was broken up into jobs. One person was logging data on an Excel spreadsheet. Now, by the way, logging data on an Excel spreadsheet is a skill that will last that child for the rest of his life. It's probably the most important thing as a tool that kid's going to learn. So it's not bad to be a 4th grader, or whatever it was, 6th grader, doing that, learning how to use it. The other one was like running the stuff, water down this thing with various angles, for the slope and reading out somebody else was typing up the report, doing the text part in Microsoft Word. Guess what? Typing into Microsoft Word is not a stupid thing to learn how to do in the 21st century. It turns out that child will be doing that for the rest of her life, no matter what her job is. So that's pretty good, and so on. So these kids were doing, and they were in pods. They were working these things out in fours. And when you walk into the classroom, it is chaos. Or it sounds like it, right? It's like chaos. Everyone is laughing. They're doing the water's going down the thing. The water is leaking. They're writing. They're typing. They're talking to each other. It is the opposite of today's classroom, where everybody's supposed to be very quiet and listen to me telling them about erosion. Instead, they're teaching themselves about erosion. I'm sure they'll remember it much better than doing them themselves than if I taught them something. And they're having the time of their lives. And they're creating, by the way, real science. This information would go back to the city of San Diego. Here are our sampling sites, and here's the erosion capacity of each of these slopes. You're in real trouble here, So it was real. And the kids knew it was real. It wasn't just some made-up thing for them to learn something. They were contributing to the city's welfare by doing this. It was totally cool, as far as but it didn't sound anything like a normal classroom, if normal is today. It really was loud. And so I found this teacher, I pulled her aside, and I said, so you were here before one-to-one computing, and now you're here now. What's the biggest difference between then and now? How do you feel about it? And I'll tell you before I give you her answer. California had spent, I think it was, $37 billion just before that to achieve what they thought was the big goal. The big goal was to improve performances by students by reducing class size. And they wanted to reduce class size from, I think it was 30 to 27. And they spent, whatever that was, $37 billion to do this, with absolutely no change at all in the result. It was money down a rat hole. A lot of money. So I asked this teacher, what's the difference between then and now? She said, the biggest difference is the amount of time, personal time, I have with every student. I said, really? What's the difference? How much? She said, well, a lot. How much? I think 4x. I think I have 4 times more time with every student than I had before. Now, for those teachers that were thinking this is a barrier, right? It's not a barrier. That teacher was telling me something I'd never even thought of. She was able to spend 4 times as much time with each student working on their own problems as before the computers showed up, the technology showed up. So it's a good thing because it allows the teacher to teach. One of the other unexpected consequences of this whole thing is you'd think, okay, we've got these teachers who are a little fragile. They're 20-year veterans. We all know who we're talking about in math, in science, and they hate tech. If they've told me out loud, if I bring the technology into the classroom, they will leave. They'll quit early. They'll take early retirement. Nope, they won't. And in fact, what happens is they will stay for an extra 3 years. And if you interview them after they've begun that 3-year, what they say is, this is what I thought. This is why I wanted to be a teacher. This is why I joined to be a teacher. This kind of teaching is what I wanted. And I think there are a lot of teachers who are really driven by passion, but they encounter so many time wasters and so many difficult situations that are frustrating to them in their drive to be a great teacher. It really does frustrate them. It drives them kind of crazy. And here is a system which allows them and encourages them to be the thing that they always wanted to be. And that's why teachers are the best champions 6 months later. So a few more pieces here, and then we'll do questions and answers and so on. I wanted to talk briefly about some of the specifics that we learned so that if you decide this is an important and useful way to go, you have a little information. And then I'll just mention, by the way, there's a website you can go to, which is projectinkwell.com, and see some of the things that we've done. Like all websites, it's a little sketchy, but it has stuff there. And I'll mention some things which I think are maybe obvious, but worth saying. So one thing is, you need to have enough bandwidth. You have to have enough bandwidth. If kids are going to have a connected device, now that all the knowledge in the world has been digitized, and you've decided, doesn't it make sense for teachers and learners to have access to that knowledge? It does. You have to have the bandwidth to allow that to happen. So that's a plumbing problem. Wi-Fi. You also have to have devices that won't break. You don't want to have a load of work put onto your school constantly messing with devices. So be a little careful about what you pick. There are a lot of good devices today. There weren't 10 years ago. And by the way, the timing for this is exquisitely good. 10 years ago, these things that you would have had weren't quite being made and would have cost you lots of money. You get a Panasonic Steelbook, whatever they're called, that would have been a good thing. That's probably $6,000. Well, now you can get almost the same kind of thing for probably $500. So there's a radical shift in what you can get for the money in bandwidth and in the devices and in the software and so forth, so that this is actually quite affordable. Intel has looked at this pretty carefully and decided that if you do it carefully, I have to be a little bit cautious how I say this, with some schools, it doesn't cost anything, because you actually find ways to cost shift, things like telephone bills, so on, that allow you to pay for it with things that you do differently than before. If you do only VoIP calling for everybody in the school district and take all that money and put it into support for your teachers, for instance, great, good idea. No one's harmed. So there are things like, some other not quite obvious things here are, students being more engaged, attend more, your attendance will go up. Well, you get paid per head per day as a school. So good, you'll make more money. You, as a school, you'll make more money. The lack of teacher churn means you don't have to train so much. So that means good, you'll save some money on that. So there are various things that are not totally clear from the get-go, which allow you to make a financial step, which may have seemed daunting 10 years ago, but which today are not so daunting. And in fact, if Intel's right, in some cases at least, don't cost you anything if you do it carefully. So don't think of this as a cost-prohibitive thing that I'm trying to describe to you. I would think of it the other way around. The costs of not properly educating students in today's world, the way it was described by the PI reporter, are infinite. And I don't have to convince you of what's happening to the American economy today and of how competitive the world is going to be for your kids, with kids from other places, and with systems that are different from ours, which subsidize products and educations and everything else. So we are the land of the free, but we pay a price for that. And one of the prices is we have to struggle a little harder, I think. And we have to be a little bit smarter. So we're not doing that yet, but we should. We actually have to. We have to do this for them. The devices can't be bring your own, contrary to what you read about in enterprises. For Michael's sake, they have to all be identical, because some poor person will have the sole job of fixing them every morning and every night. And if they're bring your own, and you thought you saved $50 here and $50 there, let me tell you right now, you didn't. You will lose all that savings times 10 paying for somebody to mess with hard drives on various types of machines that don't match each other and can't be easily replaced. And when someone loses something or breaks it or can't bring it in, the battery died, you can't just give them another one for the day. You don't want to be there. So just let that go and accept the idea that you will have brand new, very cool, all the same, easy to work on devices. And by the way, one teacher told me once, from Vashon actually, don't forget the coolness factor. And that's true. So, you know, we're talking about kids. And kids love things that have the coolness factor. And you guys are all going to be cool just by having done what you might do here. And that will make the kids proud of being in school here. And other kids will say to them, what's it like? And they'll say, it is so cool. They will. They will. You have to provide professional development for the teachers. And as my friend Daryl put it, not optional. When Daryl started this, it was Daryl and Barbara who was in charge of the teaching staff. They worked hand in hand. And the first thing that was, okay, summer's here. We're going to give the teachers these devices that Daryl had designed, these laptops. And in September, we're going to start. So the teachers have 3 months in the summer to play with the hardware and software, get used to using this stuff. They can get their own lessons kind of up and ready. They'll have some help with that. And they'll have training. That professional training that happened that summer was not optional. Daryl loves saying this. He got some real joy out of this. I could tell how much of a fight he had. And a teacher would say, well, I've got to do something. I've got to go to Italy. No. If you think you're teaching in September, we'll pay you, but you will attend, and you will get professional training now, this summer. Plan on it. And they were religious about that. And because they were religious about that, they had huge success. But the best way to blow this whole thing is to not do that. If the teachers, no matter how smart they are, don't have professional training before this begins, you will have a bad time. I would say don't do it. Don't even try. Don't launch the project. That has to be an integral and key part of the whole thing. Teachers need to have professional training before they enter the classroom that first day in September, teaching those kids what they're going to do. Behind that, in support of the teachers, there needs to be a good tech support person for the hardware and software, and probably a separate person who's providing professional support, curricular support. So when the teacher says, look, I want to do this thing from NASA, but I can't get it to run, they'll say, here's how it works. So that all that stuff that the teachers might be concerned about is offloaded, and they're left with a simple question of, what do you want to teach? How do you want to do it? And generally what will happen is they'll start with what they were doing before. So if you're teaching Houghton Mifflin, this kind of thing, okay, fine, you can do that again. You can actually take that exact course and just put it online. But as time goes by, what's going to happen is you're pretty interested in those space exploration shots of the rocket going up, and here's a free one right here. All you have to do is click on it, and all your kids see it. I'm going to do that. And you build a new kind of experience for students over time. So maybe 3 years later, that same teacher who started out kind of shoveling the old stuff online ends up with a very different situation 3 years later, where there are all kinds of pieces of video and references to various things out on the net that are much better than what Houghton Mifflin had in the book. So that's part of the engagement, not just the mystery of having a box in front of you, but the response of the teacher bringing what he or she knows about science or music, whatever it is, in life, in reality, just like those kids learning about the slopes of San Diego. It's not fake anymore. Now you're engaged in the real world together, talking about how it works with video and sound, and it's a radically different experience. First thing that happens when you implement this in a school generally is writing skills improve by 40% in the first year. Whoa. Math only goes up by 5%, by the way. Writing, 40. So what's going on here? Well, it turns out, of course, if you're writing on a computer, you can do a much better job than if you're writing on a piece of paper. And so, I mean, we all know, I'm telling you things you already know, but the physicality of it, instead of having to cross out, it's like the old typewriter, writing on a typewriter is harder than writing on a modern word processing program. So instead of having to take the paper out and write again, you actually can be real time about it. And as you learn, as you do the research you're asking about, you stick that into your story. So the more you learn, it becomes part of your writing. And you're able to actually change your mistakes and correct your mistakes in real time instead of having to have a whole new piece of paper. It is so obvious when I say it, but the result is that your writing abilities as a student go up by 40% in the first year, generally. The idea that you asked about thinking, I think, is even more important. And I guess you'd have to ask yourself, if you had a choice between taking a social studies book or a civics book, for instance, or a philosophy book, and just, here's your text, memorize this, and then give it back to me when I quiz you, compared to me saying to you, Wittgenstein was a pretty interesting guy. I don't care that you've never heard of him, but by a week from Friday, I want your thoughts on this guy in 6 pages. Go find out for yourself, right? Well, that's interesting, because now you have to do the work yourself. If you're a cheat, you plagiarize somebody. But if you're an honest student, you go out and you read all this stuff, you have your own ideas, you come back and you write something, and you've created something of real value, not for me, but for you. You have a deep understanding of Wittgenstein that you would never have had just from reading a textbook and parroting back to the teacher. So I think that this kind of toolkit is ideal for creating thinkers in a way that the current system is not. Today, you get all the bad stuff with none of the good stuff. Today, let's say you're not very good at anything, or you're equally bad at everything, or however you want to state it, what you just stated. That's normal. What we're doing is we're adding a piece where if you have a passion and an ability for a particular area, you can actually pursue that passion. That doesn't mean, contrary, I think, to what you're suggesting, that you don't have to study civics if your passion is in music. It doesn't mean you don't have to study math, but it does mean that you are allowed to drive as fast as you can in music or in physics or whatever it is. So I think I would disagree with you about the assumption you were making that you're allowed to flub everything else. That's where teachers come in. It's a teacher's job to make sure you don't cruise at 10 feet on everything else. Quizzes, right? So you do a multiple choice quiz in whatever, biology. If I'm the teacher, I sit down that night and spend 3 or 4 hours going like this. Well, I could have been spending that time running a new lesson. But I didn't. I just went like this for 20 questions for each student for 40. So there is a terrific freeing that can happen from drudgery for teachers who would rather spend their minds and time on things that really have impact on the students rather than just doing things that are brainless. So I think the teachers appreciate both sides of this. There's a plus side and a relieving the minus side. Well, first you'd be in pods of 4, right? Second, we would probably start out by, I would say, today we're going to talk about the classroom of the future, and here are some ideas. It could be this way, it could be that way, it could be that way. And I'd like you guys to to work on this for half an hour, and then we're going to have a conversation about it. So come up with something. I want to have some real evidence. I want you to go out and find people who've tried different things, and then come back and share it with the classroom. So for an hour, you and your 3 pals are just working on that. You're out in the net looking for evidence of other experiments. Any country, doesn't matter. And then you're going to make a pitch that afternoon at 2 o'clock and convince us all that what you found is the right thing. No matter what happens, you're going to learn a lot about education, and I'm going to learn a lot about it, and it'll be a hit. So that's what I would have done here if we had the technology to allow you to look at what are they doing in Spain, what are they doing in Germany, why do the Singapore math things work so well. You know, there's a lot to look at. We can't do that here because of this system. I think as we look at kids over the decades, they keep changing in terms of their own profiles of what they're capable of doing. And mine's probably a little bit out of date. But when I was looking at this really closely, it looked as though the smart thing was middle school. And what was happening in Maine and around the country, Michigan, a lot of places, was you start with kind of 7, and you just work your way up each year. You didn't have to do everybody all at once. So you do 7th grade, and then 7th and 8th, then 7th, 8th, and 9th, and eventually you got the whole high school and the middle school set up. Then you could work your way down, but nobody had worked very far down. And so I can't say that it's a good idea to do this with extremely young kids. I think what we will see probably is high variation. It's a physical problem and a mental problem. But the stuff that I'm talking about right now would be middle school and up. And then I think we'll see in the future more specialized things for younger kids that fit their brain development and their finger size. It's like what happened in higher ed with calculators, where instead of doing the math with a pencil, you can bring a calculator in. You're not being tested on that anymore. It's not the arithmetic that you're being tested on. It's whether you understand the equation. And I think you just described a core part of the revolution of how we have to learn. Imagine that we are today essentially teaching the same curriculum that I had when I was a kid and that Daniel Webster had when he was a kid. Now look around you at the world. You've read all the stories about how many yottabytes of data are being created every week, how rapidly in a compound annual growth way, information is increasing, technology, knowledge, science, all these things are running way up into exponential curves, and we're not touching that. We're not teaching it, we're not touching it. So it was critically important that a kid know that 9 times 5 is 45. Is that critically important now? I don't know. But what is probably really important is if something has a single rate of change and it's involved in your life, what's that like? What if it's a double rate of change? What if it's a second degree order of change? Can you understand what that means? And can you deal with it quickly enough to get out of the trouble? If it's global warming, can you fix it? Do you understand what you do? Even understand? I've been told, and I don't know if this is true, that the human mind today, educated as we have been in this system, is not, in general, capable of that. It is not capable of understanding second order change. So that's not good. So I think that your question, if I'm not taking it too far down the road here, is a good one, because we have to be good at these things. We have to become good at meta-knowledge. It's going to be easy to find the answer, as we do over every dinner argument, which president was the number 37? You just don't have to memorize that. But you do have to know what is a president, and where can I find this out really fast, and then get on to something important like what is freedom? Or how do I maintain freedom? Or what happens if I have a second order change in the world temperature? So these things, this meta-level stuff, are things that we don't teach right now. And these are the things that kids really will have to wrestle with in the tragic story of their environment and in their own lives on a daily basis. So I think there will be a big change in attitudes between the old attitude of like Singapore learning kind of thing and the more modern attitude of creativity, innovation, how to see forward, how to constantly be fresh in your knowledge. Those things will matter a lot. I would have said the information age is costing us way more energy than we had hoped, which is totally true. So I don't know if I'm properly stating it, but that's a problem. And you can't go backwards, I don't think. You can't say, well, knowledge is bad, or we don't want to store information, but we certainly have to go faster forward and say, we can't keep burning coal to do this. That's impossible. That is suicide. So if we're going to need more energy, and guess what? You're right. We're going to need not just more, a lot more. I was at a meeting in Silicon Valley a couple nights ago. Maybe the world will need 2 or 4 times more within the next 100 years. Not just solving the problems we have today from coal burning and so forth. 2 to 4 times more. So where's that going to come from? Not from coal. So if we could kind of get on it and have a rational conversation about, all right, let's make a chart. Let's have a pod. We'll have 4 people in the pod. You tell us how much we're going to need. I'll work on what are the 4 choices we have, how to get there, and so forth, right? That's what we have to do. Our Congress can't do it, but we have to do it. We have to do it. We have to make up our minds that we like solar, or we like whatever the heck it's going to be, nuclear, and then figure that out and do it, because it's not going to be coal. I think that's a red herring, and here's why. First of all, a good teacher won't let that happen. It's not going to be screen all day. It's going to be discussing things that come from the world. More interesting maybe is, you may remember when email was invented. I mean, we're each old enough. And the immediate thought was jet travel, business travel, and maybe all travel will go down. Because now you can just email. And you know what happened. Travel went up by a factor of 4 or something. So it turns out, no surprise, we are a social animal. And when you make a pen pal in Africa, you want to meet the pen pal. When you make a business deal with somebody in China, you got to go over and talk to them. So we ended up having much more social lives than before. And if you watch a kid today on a phone texting people, and check their contact list, and see how many people are on the contact list, and ask yourself, when you were 12 years old, how many people were on your contact list? And I guarantee you that 500 is not the number. So I think, in fact, it's the opposite, and that kids are going to be more and more social in larger and larger spheres, maybe more radiant around their own interests. And in fact, that's not a real worry to have. Shouldn't. And if you go to a modern university, you go to Stanford or Dartmouth or Harvard, all the kids have pads in the classroom. And the students, the teachers in those classes put their lessons on the web every day. And they assume that the students have the technology to take that themselves. And what they're doing in the classroom is different than it used to be because they're now filling in the blanks. They're kind of like, you already have the lesson. I'm assuming you've got that on your computer. So you don't have to take notes on that. You've got them. So now we can free you up to pay attention. And there's always a problem with, are you really going to pay attention? That's a different problem. But in terms of, I'm trying to teach you physics, that's what's happening at Harvard. So not only are you preparing them for what they're going to run into when they get into those schools, which is true, but I wouldn't in any way assume that by having a more advanced form of education now in high school, that there's less chance of them getting into Harvard. I think it's the other way around. That's a very competitive step, getting into a good school. And if some student, let's just make this up for a minute. Let's say some student has a passion for, you pick, you know. Maybe they have a passion for mathematics. Pardon?
Higher science.
Great. Sciences. And so if that student has done extra work and excelled in some way, which is not expected and not required, but it's because of their passion in that thing, in my experience, that's what's going to get them into that school. There are so many people who have a 4-point that doesn't do it anymore. There are so many people who have a good SAT score. That doesn't get you in anymore. That just lets you say hello. And I went to Stanford, but wherever you're going to try to get into, that admissions group is looking for someone who's special. You're not special with a 4-point. You're normal in that batch of applicants. Now, what did you do that was special? Oh, well, I taught all these kids in Africa how to do math. Really? How'd you do that? Well, I used technology. Oh, how'd you do that? So now you stand out. And I think that's exactly what you need in a modern setting to get into a great school. First, you've got to discuss this among yourselves and decide it's worth doing. These things don't work without community support. The parents and the people in the community have to really want this, or it won't work. If it's something you really want, then it's a pretty straightforward set of steps. And we can actually put you in touch with people who've done it already, so you have someone to call when you hit a roadblock, including Daryl. But essentially what you're going to do is decide, yeah, we want to go this route. Let's put out a timetable. So let's say high school opens a certain time. We're going to have, or middle school is going to be the first place we start. So that's September of whatever year. So that means in June of that year, we're going to buy some laptops for teachers. In August or September, we're going to buy laptops for the kids, or whatever they are, pads. And then we're going to have professional development set up for those teachers. We'll start out really easy. We'll let the teachers teach what they're already teaching, just help them get that kind of online for the first year, and then we'll make sure they have enough bandwidth to support them in terms of Wi-Fi, and we'll have 2 people available, one's for tech, one's for professional support. We're done.
You know, another agenda we have here is that I think that the school can serve as a foundation and as a model for how we do public discourse, respectful engagement, problem solving as a community to decide what we're going to do in the future. And I think we get to do that. I think we get to have those conversations and to find our pathway and to put it out there for people to react to and to come to a place. And I'd like to do that by spring break, which is the second week of April. So our next conversation is going to be a week from tonight on January 31st. And if you're interested in being involved in this, you have a tear-off sheet on that handout that you got. And it says, put the thing in the box at the back of the room. And there's a big sign back there that says, this is the box at the back of the room. All right? So we can be in conversation together if you give me the means to do that by a way to contact you. And we'll keep you in the loop. There's lots of ways to be involved. You can be involved in conversations. You can be involved in committees. You can be involved in the surveys that we're going to put out. But we are an invitation to this community to find a way to have a conversation for the sake of where we're going to head with our kids in the future.